Good afternoon and welcome to Sunday Brunch with Higher Heights powered by the SIP. And your SIP host, Judith Brown Dianis from the Advancement Project National Office, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Fatima Goss-Grays from the National Women's Law Center, and Tracy Sturdivant. She's gone fishing. Tracy Sturdivant from the League is on vacation. One day, Adrian and I will be on vacation.
One day after the
one
election.
one day.
In good
But
time.
welcome to the SIP Hour. This is your weekly conversation on Sunday where we're brunching, a conversation gathering Black women to be informed, engage, and to take action. And we are excited about the conversation today. So grab your cup of coffee, if you're sipping as an adult, or a glass of water, and invite your network to this timely conversation. Black women have always led. We've always been the defenders of our homes, our communities, and our nation. And this week, we've seen the stellar leadership of Black women continue to drive a national debate around how do we ensure that Black Americans and Black women are not only thriving in this country, but surviving. And so today we are going to be in conversation with some amazing Black women leaders who have literally either took to the streets and marched in protest, amplified the voices of Black women. This has been the Blackest Weekend leading into November, and we'll tell you why it's the Blackest Weekend. And so we are going to start a conversation with two of our amazing guests talking about the activism of Black women athletes. So again, tell us where you are watching from. It's how we start every episode. Where are you watching from? What city, state, and what part of the house? And tell us why you are a Black woman who is leading in this moment, and how are you using your activism in this moment. And so I'm going to turn it over to Judith Brown Dianis, who will be able to introduce you to our first set of brunch guests.
Yes, we are looking forward to this conversation. As we all know, Black athletes have historically played a very important role in our movements for civil rights and racial justice. And today is no different. We are seeing athletes step up to the front and speak out as we, after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the most recent one with the shooting of Jacob Blake. And so Black athletes know that they have power, that our country considers them to be influential, and that people look to them and want to hear what they have to say, and that they have an audience that is much larger than some of us. That there are white folks who are listening, there are brown folks who are listening, and that they also have relationships with corporations who will also listen to them. And so today we're going to be joined in conversation by Morgan Tuck, who is a forward with the Seattle Storm of the WNBA. So if you don't know, Morgan played at UConn, which, anybody who knows anything about women's basketball, especially college, knows that UConn doesn't lose. Maybe on once in a while, but Gino prides himself on winning. As you can see, I'm a basketball fan. And we're also being joined by Paula Madison, who is an author, a business owner, and former owner and CEO of the Los Angeles Sparks, one of the best teams around. And she does say she's retired now. She does tell people that. And so really excited to have you all join us today. And want to thank you also, Morgan, for what you're doing. So I'm going to hand it over to Glenda.
Yeah. And so, we were sharing in our pre-sip just how proud we are, Morgan, of you, all of the players of the WNBA, and frankly the WNBA, for being leaders in this moment. Before many of the other sports franchises really stepped out and have been leading. And I am originally from Connecticut, so we are very proud of you here in Connecticut, although you've left us to go over to Washington, but proud of how you were a leader on campus both on and off court, and you continue to do that in your professional career. And, of course, we're very proud of you as a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so share a little bit about how you and your teammates and your colleagues across the WNBA really decided to approach this season in a very bold way. I know it was a long conversation. I think you guys stepped off on those courts on that first day during a global pandemic, with really centering what you wanted the season to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. And leading up to the season was very different. I think we have our players union. And when I was with Connecticut playing for the Connecticut Sun, I was a player rep. So I really got to understand how it works and the meetings and be a part of a lot of conversations and important conversations. And so leading up to the season, first we didn't know if we were going to have a season. And then once we figured out the bubble situation, then it was like, okay, who's going to play, who's not going to play? And then we had to figure out, okay, now we're going to play. What is this season going to be about? And that's something that I think every player in the league kind of joined around, is that we're going to have this season, and it's not the ideal situation. We're away from our families and friends, but we're going to have this season to amplify the voices of women who have been killed by police violence. And so we dedicated this season to Breonna Taylor and getting justice for her, and just to say her name campaign. And I think for all of us, 80% of our league is African-American women. So we really identify, that could have been us. It could have been our sister, mother, cousin, anybody in our family. So for us this season, obviously we want to win and we like playing basketball, but it means so much more. And it was amazing to see just the collective unity of everyone in the league really feeling that. And I think that's what's driving us so far in this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think from you putting Breonna Taylor's names on the jersey to you taking knees to literally this week when the T-shirts, y'all, the players that decided not to play that day wore for Jacob Blake. I mean, it gave me chills, but it also, you used your platform in a unique way. How did you feel this particular week as you guys made a decision to, stand in solidarity with athletes across the globe, frankly, deciding not to play?
I was just really proud. We weren't actually playing that day. So to see, Washington kind of took the lead. And so everyone kind of followed suit. But at the same time, this week has been super exhausting. It's like we're in a bubble right now. So sometimes you don't feel like you're a part of what's going on in the world, but you have to keep yourself informed. And I think that's something that we try to do. And we try to make sure that, we're not forgetting why we're here. And it's sad that this happened. It shouldn't be this way, but Jacob Blake kind of, I guess, reignited all of our fires and why we're here, of the reason we're trying to amplify voices, the reason why we want to fight. And that was a big reason this week why we decided to continue to play, even though a lot of us didn't want to. But we know that our biggest impact is if our voices are heard. And if we didn't play, our voices wouldn't be heard anymore. We have a lot of games on national television where we're getting a chance to really speak our minds and say how we feel. And so I think this week was good in a sense for the players to kind of reconnect. We've been playing against each other a lot, but we're back to feeling, I think, like one, and just really trying to push through the rest of the season to bring justice to Jacob Blake, Breonna Taylor, anyone and everyone that needs it. That's what we're trying to do.
So Morgan, I have a question about, as someone who works with organizers and watches the magic of people coming together around a goal and trying to move power. So was it helpful in terms of the kinds of actions that you all have been taking? Is it helpful because you're in the bubble and you're together, and so it's easier to coordinate and get on the same page?
I think so. Our Players Union president, Nneka Dumike, she's phenomenal. I think even earlier this year when we were going through our CBA agreement negotiations, she takes the lead in such a way where she keeps everyone informed. She makes everyone feel like we understand what's going on and that our voices matter. And so that was the same, especially this week. We had a vigil, and then afterward we had a players meeting where you had all 144 players there, and we talked about what we wanted to do. And so yes, that's so much easier when you can do it in person, and we aren't anywhere else. We don't have really to do. We're not busy doing something else. So that definitely helps. But I just think it's good that, at first we weren't sure about the bubble, how it would work, but I think in the end, it's really allowed us to unify our voice. And I think that's making a bigger impact than if we would have been trying to do the same things in a normal season.
So, Paula, can you talk some about the role of the WNBA in particular in this moment? I mean, we've seen the WNBA kind of stepping out, for those who don't know, stepping out first. But then we've also seen the NBA, we saw Naomi Osaka, we saw the Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball, now the NFL. So talk some about the role of women in particular in kind of like this moment or not moment, but even in the history, right, of Black women athletes stepping up against or for social and racial justice.
Sure. Well, good morning to everyone, or good afternoon to everyone. And I feel compelled to say hello to my Delta sorors out there, just because there's been so much AKA. So, I'm going to throw up my mids for a minute, and then I'm going to step back into the role. I think that one of the things that we're experiencing right now is in current times, there are people who actually are shouting, shut up and play ball. They're saying that to athletes, and frankly, I don't know of a time in history when Black athletes have ever just shut up and play. If we go back even to the early days of Jack Johnson, we can go back to the days of Althea Gibson, we can go to the days of Muhammad Ali, on and on and on. The 68 Olympics, it has been a part of the culture of Black athletes to not separate their lives, their real day-to-day lives, from the lives that they have on the field and on the courts. I would say that as a former commissioner of the WNBA, and that came about because of my family's ownership of the Sparks, what I saw was, it really was two very different cultures between the WNBA and the NBA. What I will tell you was the most glaring difference is that in the WNBA, almost every female player is a college graduate. Many, many of them are mothers. Many, many of them are spouses and in relationships. And so with all that Black women have as part of their background, their persona, their spirit, their being, it would have been impossible, I think, for these amazing Black female athletes to not say something. It would have been impossible for them to just play. I know Nneka Ogwumike because Nneka worked, she was on the Sparks when my family owned the team. She's dedicated, she's brilliant, and she's not the singular person inside of the WNBA who has that perspective, as Morgan explained. What I think is that Black women have always been at the forefront. We've seen this even this weekend, the Blackest Weekend, the March on Washington. Black women were in major leadership roles throughout. Black women frequently don't get acknowledged as the leaders of the movement because in the course of the culture, there are so many other elements that come into play, including the culture of not overshadowing or taking the lead from our brothers. But the fact is that in present times, there are women athletes who are as known globally as male athletes and representing the Black community. So if you go to the Williams sisters, you mentioned earlier, amazing young Japanese, Haitian tennis player who is risking her fandom by stepping out the way she is. The WNBA, they were adamant about their warm-up suits, their shirts, all of it, giving them a voice that maybe they could not have expressed because not everybody was putting a microphone in their faces. But when they took to the courts, for certain, you saw they were making a statement about Black Lives Matter. They were making a statement about pay attention to what is also happening to African American women. We're all, and children, we're all being slaughtered. We're all being killed in ways that we're not seeing our counterparts in the white community killed for some of the very same actions. So I applaud my sisters in the WNBA. I'm all in, I'm all for them. And, you know, although the Seattle team beat the Sparks a couple of times when I was owner, you know, I'm not gonna hold that against you, Morgan. I love you, my sister. You good with me.
So, Paula, I think that if you're exactly correct around Black women have been leading and oftentimes, you know, leading behind the scenes, you know, at the intersection of kind of both your worlds as a former owner of a WNBA franchise and as a media executive. Would love to hear your thoughts about how you see the coverage of the movement of the moment, and particularly the coverage of Black women, both Black women as victims of the attack on Blackness, but also our leadership in this moment.
Our leadership in terms of our community, without question, is there. Our leadership in terms of news organizations and the authority that we bring into the various journalistic entities that allows us to make a priority the coverage of what's happening to the Black community and what's happening especially to Black women. The numbers of us haven't particularly grown exponentially since, you know, I started out as a journalist in 1975. It has been a long time. I left daily journalism as the vice president and news director of NBC4 in New York, and then I moved into running stations. What I would say is that we still have a long way to go. I'm still seeing, for example, I had the great fortune to know a sister who's a news director. And when I saw on a particular station where they were talking about protesters and then showing video of looting, right? It's like, we need to make sure that we are clear that the First Amendment right to peaceable assembly is a guarantee of our Constitution. I like to remind people that this nation was founded on protest. There were citizens of England who lived here in the United States who objected to taxation without representation and then hurled bales of tea into the Boston Harbor. And the first person killed in the revolution was a Black man named Crispus Attucks. I say all that to say so that people understand that if you can cite as a right that a young man, white, can cross state lines with a semi-automatic weapon, and he states that he's doing it in order to defend property, how is that different from when a young adolescent is carrying a toy gun, or a sister who is asleep in her own home, minding her own business, gets busted into by police officers who shoot her to death? When we cover these stories, the important thing to remember is that the majority of the news coverage is still not being done by people who are of the African diaspora. The majority of this coverage still has to do with people who are not familiar with our culture, not familiar nor comfortable with our communities. And so what we get are words like thug. What we get describing us, not that we get to be youths or teens, but we get to be people who are gang-like behavior, people who are rioters. We don't get to be humans. And what I think we need to do, particularly as we're watching the coverage now, is be very, very careful and be very, very aware that we as a viewing public need to contact those news outlets that do not give us fair coverage, non-biased coverage. I think it's important that we understand that we have a voice and we use those voices.
you just told us. You set the record straight. I think I really appreciate your assessment of what is happening in the media. I want to ask, want to pivot a little bit because I do think like the media and the narratives are really important. And there are narratives beyond kind of the traditional media. And so wanted to ask Morgan in this moment. And first, let me tell you that there are a lot of sisters in the movement, in the racial justice movement, like myself, who want to say thank you for what you all are doing. That we know that these kinds of actions that you all may be taking actually does come with some risk for yourselves in terms of your own careers, and that you all have seen to it that this is important. And so we are excited that you all are down with us. There are lots of us, including myself, who would love to help y'all think through what's next, because there's so much power in what you are doing. And want to ask you, though, there are little Black girls all over this country who are watching you. There are Black girls who played basketball in high school and elementary school who are watching you. What do you hope that they are taking from what you all are doing?
I would say the biggest takeaway is just that your voice matters. You know, no matter how small you might think your platform is, or if you're on TV, or if you're just in your community at school, like how you feel and the things that you want to get across are important. I think a lot of times, and I've seen it in sports and out of sports, I think a lot of times as Black women, our emotions and feelings are discredited. We're seen as either too emotional or we're the stereotypical angry Black woman. And I think for us as a league, we don't care about that. You know, we want to make sure how we feel is it's valid, no matter how it comes out, no matter our way of showing it to everybody, it matters and it's valid and it's something that's important to a lot of people. And so I would say to little girls, just, when you feel something, you say it. You don't hold back just because of how other people are going to feel or if it's going to make them uncomfortable, but you just speak your truth, and it's important. No matter how you say it, it matters.
Well, thank you so much, Morgan Tuck, for speaking truth to power, and for Paula Madison forever being apologetically Black. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to continuing to have a conversation as we move towards November 3rd. Many people have probably seen Morgan has been very active in getting out the vote through a variety of programs. She's got a PSA. And so we know that this is just the beginning of a conversation for the next 60 so days as we ensure that every Black woman has the tools she needs to vote, but more importantly, organize our communities to the polls. So thank you so much, Morgan and Paula. And we're going to toss it over to Adrian and Fatima to talk a little bit about the Blackest Weekend Ever. If you didn't know this was the Blackest Weekend Ever in Black political activism, we're going to recap why it was and how this is just the beginning of the final drive to November. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're extending this Blackest Weekend right now as we speak. So I want to thank also Morgan and Paula, and as the resident Seattleite on the show, just say how proud I know that folks in Seattle are of the work that the Storm is doing, both Morgan and Breonna Stewart, not just for the national platform that they're creating, but also for the way in which the team is showing up around these local issues as well. So thank you so much. And then we know that part of the reason why this has been the Blackest Weekend Ever is because we saw major mobilization this weekend, both in Washington, D.C. I know folks saw all of the coverage of the March on Washington, then the anniversary march. People certainly tuned in for the virtual coming together for the Black National Convention. And so I want to bring on right now two of the folks who were integral in helping to bring to fruition both of those really important, really incredible events that we saw take place this weekend. And so if I could bring on both Kayla Reed, who is one of the co-founders, can I say, Kayla, of the Electoral Justice Project, of the Movement for Black Lives. And I'm actually having a hard time seeing you guys. There you go. So, and Ebony Riley, who was integral in making sure that this year's anniversary March on Washington came off in the way that it did, which I certainly saw the imagery and some of the coverage on television, and it was quite frankly amazing. We were texting back and forth about not just the beautiful images of people, but also the ways in which the speakers really spoke to this moment that we're in. So Kayla, I'm actually going to come to you first because both of these events were grounded in history and grounded in the history of our movement. And you all chose to look to the 1972 National Black Political Convention as inspiration, I think, but also in terms of paying tribute to folks who came together in Gary before some of y'all were even born, to really help you all think through what this could be, what it could look like, what it needed to say. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that, how you all use that as inspiration to create the beautiful 3 hours that we saw the other night?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me back on the SIP. So the 1972 Black National Convention was so important because right in the midst of the Black Power movement, many people descended on Gary, Indiana from different factions of the larger struggle for Black liberation, folks who were Black feminists, folks who were Black nationalists, folks from really big organizations and local organizers who were on the front lines of the uprisings that took place in the late 60s and were organizing on the front lines for housing and economic justice. And really they mobilized to Gary to think through what would it take to have a unified front and a Black national agenda. And there were so many people there. You know, Shirley Chisholm had just announced her run. Folks like Angela Davis, Harry Belafonte, were all in this place really struggling over a Black national convention, a Black national agenda, and thinking about big questions. Should our movement center in electoral politics? Should we have policies that touch on climate? They were dealing with continued police violence and state-sanctioned violence. They were critiquing capitalism, all under this banner that it's nation time, that Black people were so important and our movement was so important that we needed to struggle toward a collective vision. And for the Movement for Black Lives, since really our inception, we've been struggling toward that same frame, that same goal. What is our North Star in this moment? Uprising after uprising, when it was Ferguson in 2014, which brought me in, there were so many people who were already in movement, right? We're standing 15 years out from Katrina that brought so many folks into movement. And then Baltimore and Charlotte, and now we're in this 50-state uprising that is impacting the world around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And everyday folks say Black Lives Matter, they want to know what we want. And the Black National Convention was about situating what Makana Timber calls a rupture moment, all this history, this current uprising, and really saying this is our agenda. And we know that this election that we're in, we have to talk about it. We can't ignore it. It's coming. And following the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, we got to hold space for what Black people want, and not in a way that created, hierarchy where there was some elected official who was the keynote speaker, but really showing the breadth and power of our movement, right? That organizers have been working and tilling the soil for the biggest ideas that are on the front lines of our country right now. The fight for climate, the fight for environment. We talked about a red, black, and green New Deal. We talked about immigration. We talked about the connection between abolishing ICE and defunding the police. We talked about the impacts of racialized capitalism. And what I hope people took from the Black National Convention is that we now understand what the Movement for Black Lives is fighting for, who is in it, and what we're going to be doing over the next 60 some odd days and far beyond that to actualize the vision.
It seems, Kayla, the clarity from the 3 hours, it is sort of a lesson for anyone who has been asking that question, what do you stand for? And people can still continue to stream it.
Yes, you can go to blacknovember.org right now to watch it. It's 3 hours. It's 4 hours if you want to see the pre-show. You get to
see the pre-show.
Adrienne and Judy in conversation because we know that the ecosystem of folks fighting for electoral justice is wide, and it's been around, right? Advancement Project has been around for 20 years, and they have been on the front lines for electoral justice. And so we come into that legacy. EJP is ran by 3 Black women, Rakia Lumumba, born in Detroit, shout out to the Midwest, Jessica from Ohio, myself from St. Louis. And we really have thought through for the last 3 years, what is the Black Power project of our movement that is electoralizing our issues, but also deepening the capacity of the best messengers for our folks, which are Black organizations.
So Ebony, let's bring you in because you all put together another march to mark the anniversary of the March on Washington. And you were instrumental 7 years ago at the 50th. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided in this moment to do this and the strategy behind it? And have you recovered? Because putting on a march is no small thing.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, first of all. And just to talk about the Midwest, I'm also from Chicago, so that's the theme in this segment as well. So Reverend Al Sharpton announced the Commitment March earlier this summer during the George Floyd Memorial. Yeah, and in Minneapolis, and thousands, including labor, local organizers, civil rights organizations, felt compelled to join us with thousands of people in DC to lift up and support the impacted families in Washington and to highlight the scourge of police violence and voter suppression that gave way to what many in this moment feels like it's an overdue reckoning on racial injustice. So it was an honor, a privilege to help organize the march. It was co-convened by National Action Network, Martin Luther King III, and many families who have and are currently seeking justice for their loved ones. Get your knee off our necks was a rallying cry used as a launching pad to advocate for federal legislative reform and mobilize us to vote in November. Federal legislation is created in DC, which is why the same reason in 1963, the March on Washington took place for federal legislation, jobs, and justice. My organization specifically has over 100 chapters nationwide and was founded in the spirit and tradition of Dr. King. We have an obligation to put members of Congress and this administration on notice who are supporting the constant domestic terrorism and suppression of our community. We stand on a rich legacy, a powerful legacy that leans towards justice and never breaks. So we're honored that so many came out because we want to make sure that the community is mobilized, especially leading towards November. There are 2 specific pieces of federal legislation that must be brought to the floor in the Senate that we were advocating for on that day as well, which was H.R. 4, which passed in the House, which is also the Voting Rights Advancement Act, known as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020, and the Justice and Policing Act of 2020, which is a measure which is the first step to many, which increases accountability for law enforcement, eliminates discriminatory policing practices, enhances transparency and data collection. As a millennial organizer, it's not lost upon me, being a part of a civil rights organization, a legacy group, that some of my colleagues have another approach, and I respect all approaches. What we must do, though, is bring our issues to the doorstep of those who we will vote out in November. We can mobilize in Washington and in Wisconsin and in Kentucky and any other state at the same time. They need to have our presence felt everywhere. So this is all about for us as Black women helping lead. I'm so excited to connect with Kayla afterwards because it's really about our lives and for those yet unborn, and we have so much work to do.
Yeah, and Ebony, when you all pulled folks together and then sort of gave them the charge, right, for what to do after the march ended, was it primarily around the 2 pieces of legislation, or tell us what you all sent people away, saying, here is the thing, after we march over to Dr. King's monument, right, here is the thing that you all should be doing?
Absolutely. There's a host of things. First and foremost, check your family's voter registration and voter information. We had contactless voter registration everywhere. We even had it on a ticket with QR codes to plug in to check your registration at the MARC site. We want you to vote down the ballot in November, research candidates, and pay attention to judicial, law enforcement, and prosecutorial elections in your state where it applies. Yeah. We want people to bring and begin to organize in their communities, support local groups on a local level and get involved. Participate in the census was another rallying cry. And we also want you to sign up to become a poll monitor and monitor these elections. So that's what we wanted to make sure, in addition to the call for police accountability that folks walked away with.
Kayla, I want to talk to you about policy too, because you guys recently brought the gift of the Breathe Act. Can you tell people what that is and what you're hoping to do?
Yeah, so the Breathe Act is, in our opinion, our 21st century civil rights piece of legislation. It does a few things that we feel like are absolutely necessary. It divests federal resources from incarceration and policing. We have heard the mantle to defund the police, and I want to take a second to say that when we think about stopping police violence, we have to look at the scale and scope and function of police. Their budgets are ballooned in comparison to the services our communities need. And as we think about stopping violence, we have to shrink their capacity. We have to take resources away, lower the number of officers. I live in St. Louis. We have per capita that is in the top 10, and we are a small city, 300,000. And we have the police per capita of a city that is 10 times our size. And we spend a fraction of a fraction on things like services. And so the Breathe Act really challenges our federal government and Congress to say, we need to reallocate, we need to divest out of these systems of incarceration and policing, and we need to invest in new non-punitive, non-carceral approaches to community safety that lead us to really invest and protect and defend Black lives. And we need to allocate that new money to build healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. The Breathe Act is a federal piece of legislation. It is being championed by Representatives Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley. And we are hoping that with the new election of Congresswoman-elect Cori Bush out of St. Louis, that we will have more folks signing on to the Breathe Act. It is something that really takes the spirit of this movement, and puts it into policy. It is something that can be localized, and so folks can come to the Movement for Black Lives, join one of the organizations that make up this ecosystem, and really plug into this work. We see that we are winning on all these fronts already, whether or not that's removing police out of our schools to help break the school to prison pipeline, whether that is actual defund campaigns that are moving resources out of police departments and into services that are desperately needed, or whether that's like closing jails. Here in St. Louis, we've closed a jail called the Workhouse, and that $16 million is going into the community through a participatory process. So we are trying our best to make sure that up and down the ballot on every level of government, we are wrestling with these really big ideas, because we know what our communities need. When you ask folks what makes them feel safe, they do not say police. They say housing and access to food and social services, school programs and after-school programs for their children. And those are the things that we need to allocate resources to if we actually want to see something close to transformation in this country.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you both a question, and I'm going to try and make this a two-part question and ask you to answer both parts at the same time. But there is, and Kayla, you're speaking to this a little bit. There is just a lot at stake, right, in the upcoming election. And so what I would ask each of you to do, and I'll start with you, Ebony, is to talk to us about what your perspective on what is at stake in this election. And then also when you think about the way in which Black women are leading right now, there are a lot of Black women who may not totally understand how they can get involved, right? How they can make an impact. So talk to us about your perspective on what's at stake, and then also your suggestions and your ideas for how Black women who want to get involved can.
Thank you, Adrienne. Absolutely. I'll keep this brief. Everything, everywhere, and every aspect of our lives and the lives of our families are at stake. It's not a drill. It's really real. And what happens in the next 4 years will affect us for a lifetime. We have Supreme Court seats. We also have, as Kayla mentioned, all of these other legislative pieces that we need to get passed through. And the Senate is blocking the majority of some of the things that can start to begin progress on the federal level. So it's, for us, this is a very important thing. Everything is at stake. So we won't pinpoint one thing. Everything that affects our life day to day is at stake. And for Black women, I would suggest, just to make sure that you keep that in mind moving forward. It's not a moment to shrink, but a moment to rise. Like, our history and our legacy demands no less. I started off as a volunteer at NAN, and to figure out where my passion was for my community and how it would lead me. And I would say to volunteer locally, where your efforts will have a direct impact on your life, and join a local chapter of a local organization or a chapter of a national organization like National Action Network. I would also say that when Black women, because we get involved, we organize, Black women make wins. It's a win for our children and a win for our families. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And Kayla?
Yeah, so during the BNC, Dr. Barbara Ransby said, we have a responsibility to study, to struggle, and to serve. And that is what Black women have always done, and that's what we continue to need to do. We know that there's so much wrong with this project called democracy, whether it's the Electoral College that is going to disproportionately give power to small states with low Black populations, whether it's a two-party system that doesn't honor the big ideas of movement, never has, or whether it's a ticket that you don't feel like is really aligned with your politics. And we can say that that is okay. All of those things are okay, but we also have to have a full assessment of what is at stake. We are not dealing with two candidates or two tickets that are the same. We are dealing with a candidate that is ushering in an era of fascism in this country. We are dealing with someone who is seeking to mobilize white anger and rage to be violent against our communities. They are shooting protesters and walking past police officers and being offered water. They are attempting to use fear-mongering and racial stereotypes to perpetuate really dangerous notions against our folks, against the people in the streets putting their bodies on the line. He has failed to rise to the occasion on this during this pandemic, where we've lost nearly 200,000 lives, and the states that are under control of his party are not doing what is necessary. They sent our kids back to school without the things that they need. They're not providing the economic relief that our families deserve. We are dealing with an eviction crisis that is going to usher us into a brand new recession. So when we talk about the issues being on the ballot, it's all at stake. And I know that every 4 years people say that this election is the most important, but this has the most significant impact on our generation, on our children. And this is our movement's chance to beat back some of these very violent rhetoric and some of these very violent tactics that are killing our communities, and to win some of those down ballot issues. We are winning. We won the right restoration in Florida. We won minimum wage here in Missouri. We have governor's races, Senate races, these judges, prosecutors races, and we know that they are fearing Black women. Black women flipped the Senate seat in Alabama. We can certainly flip the White House. And so we just have to know our power, step into it, and join in organizations that are making sure that our voices are centered and lifted up.
Yeah, definitely one of the things that you said that's really important, Kayla, is that I remember when I used to watch Sesame Street as a kid, and there was that segment that was one of these things is not like the other. Both of these sides are not the same, and we should not try and convince ourselves that they are. But there's also one other really important thing happening this year, in addition to the election, that sets up a really important thing that's happening next year. And so we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask each of you just to say a word on the census and what is important about the census. Ebony, why don't you start?
I'll make it really quick. For a better understanding of what the census is and why it's so important, I urge you to go to 2020census.gov, 2020census.gov. Click on specifically why your answers matter and begin reading why it's important for our community.
Kayla, go.
Yeah, the census is about money and power, right? It's about the resources that come into our community, and it sets the stage for how our voices are heard on local, state, and federal issues. It is by design that they do not invest in the resources in our communities to make sure we get an accurate count. Our communities were undercounted in 2010. We lost congressional seats. We lost resources that our families need. This time, this is political. It's not an apolitical document. It's the algorithm that sets the stage for political power. So complete it, get it done. Tell your folks to complete it, get it done. It's 5 minutes. You can do it on your phone. And as we get into drawing these districts next year, we absolutely know that filling out the census is one of the most important things we can do. You need to do it by September 30th.
Yes, and that's what's important, right? We were supposed to have, because of the pandemic, we were supposed to have until the end of October, and the federal government decided that, like everything else, they were going to take away our time and our ability to make sure that our community got counted. And so we only have 1 month left. So it only takes a few minutes. I think we would urge, and I know that you all and your organizations are urging people to get out, get the census done, because you actually don't have to get out to do it. And make sure that the people that you know on your phone, that's right, on your computer, but the folks that you know and that are around you, make sure that they fill out the census as well. So I want to thank you both. I know that we were joking earlier about how you two are the tired brigade, because you had these incredible events that you got done. But we appreciate all of your hard work. We appreciate all that you all offer and sacrifice, frankly, for our community and for Black women. And so thank you for coming on. We'd love to see you both back at some point, and I'm sure that we will. But really appreciate you all for being on. Thank you. I'm gonna hand it back over to Glenda as we try and continue to extend this Blackest of Black weekends, and we're gonna talk a little bit about, I think, some hot topics, right, Glenda?
Girl, I don't know what we do.
Hi, it's actually me.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know.
It's actually me. I was like,
Glenda, Judith,
Glenda, whatever.
And we're trying to get Fatima back. She's
I know,
out.
I was thrown off.
She's in Zoom land.
My mother used to do that. Judith, Janet, whatever your name is. Anyway, so we so just wanted to get some reflections in on this weekend. I had an opportunity to, with Adrian, be on the red carpet at the Black National Convention, where we talked about voter suppression issues. And I will say that one of the beautiful things about the Black National Convention, and people should watch it online, is the inclusivity, the idea that all Black lives matter. And so really important discussions about Black trans lives, about Black Puerto Ricans. I mean, it was just a cultural, beautiful event that was both discussions, but also bringing in the wholeness of our diaspora in ways that was beautiful. And so I really appreciate it. I just want to shout out Kayla and Dreamhampton, who helped produce it, yes, and Jessica Bird and Rukia Lumumba for just a beautiful, beautiful 4 hours, which is incredible, but definitely watch it. Glenda, you March on Washington, huh?
Yeah, it was. So the Black Convention was just beautifully produced, which shows the brilliance of our Black creatives. So shout out to the team. And on Friday, I had an opportunity to, watch the March on Washington. People literally left their homes and physically were in Washington. It was a large crowd, but there was also an opportunity for those who, our crew, we ain't going outside. It was an opportunity to actually virtually march, right, and still be a part of it. And the most impactful speaker for me was Martin Luther King Jr.'s granddaughter, Yolanda Denise King. Honey, if y'all didn't see her speech, she had a word, and I know her grandparents were very proud of her. And I believe we have a clip, but as we cue up that clip, she literally talked about her generation. And she said, we are the generation that would do, and we're gonna have a clip, but literally at the very end, she said, we are the generation that will fulfill my grandfather's dream. And I bawled. And so here's a clip.
Once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that calls a halt to police brutality and gun violence once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation
So y'all probably couldn't see Adrienne looking like a proud auntie. I mean, it's been a hard 8 months. This was particularly a hard week and a hard weekend, but she literally helped to inspire me to move forward. So yeah, thoughts on
Adrienne, what about you?
I want to repeat actually what Glenda just said, because there's obviously this weekend on top of the the marches or the march on top of the Black National Convention, which was really fun to be a part of. Overdressed though we may have been, Judith. It also just raises up the weight of the moment that we're in. And I think it's a good, like oftentimes in normal electoral moments, we think about Labor Day as being the kickoff, right, to sort of the long stretch or short stretch at that point to Election Day. But it really does feel like we've had moments across the last few months, right, that have been that sort of driving force, the sort of reminder of what's at stake. And I think this weekend was one of those moments where you also had this sort of joining of the ideas around the policy agenda that we have to push forward, and then also the electoral work that we have to do in order to be able to see those things come into being. So I felt both, sort of inspired, but also the weight of the moment that we are in.
Yeah, I think it is, it was a lot, right? And I think it's the continuum of our movement, right? From the generation before to the new generation, and Black National Convention being kind of like the younger folks who actually have probably even a more radical vision of what should happen. There's a photo I posted on, and I wish I could show y'all like one of our guests did before. Can y'all see that? Anyway, this is, look, can you see it? Can you see it? Anyway, you can't see it. But this young sister was out at the March on Washington with a sign that said, "You've effed," I'm not gonna say it, "You've effed with the last generation." I love that sign. That is an iconic photo. And it really does sum up, like, also the speech, right? Of like, this is Generation Z, and they're going to handle their business, which is incredible. So the weekend also was heavy because of the loss of Chadwick Boseman. It was a shock for so many of us. And I know for me, feeling that this young brother was taken from us so early, that the work that he did and the stories, the Black stories that he told, were so important to us. Stories that we had not seen before, from 42, which is one of my favorite movies about Jackie Robinson, to, of course, Black Panther, and other films. And he will be sorely missed.
Yeah, someone said after Sterling K. Brown, had won a bunch of awards a couple of years ago, someone said that he had so many firsts that Chadwick Boseman was going to have to play him in a biopic. And it reminded me, it was hilarious then, because it reminded me that he had played so many important figures and so many important icons in our history. And that he did them in this period of time where none of us knew that he was suffering and that he was struggling. And so from from James Brown to Thurgood Marshall to the Black Panther and all of the Marvel films in between, the fact that he delivered these incredible performances gave us what we needed in each and every one of them, while he himself was fighting for his life and giving us life, right, through every performance. It's really, I am very sad But I also think that it is a demonstration of someone who understood that they were living on purpose, and they carried that purpose. He carried that purpose into the very end. And so I'm struck. My whole family is struck. We watched, last night. I didn't know if I'd be able to watch Black Panther, but I actually did. We watched it family at 8:00 with everybody else, and I felt actually inspirational because it is an inspirational film. I don't know if I'm going to be able to rewatch the other films of Chadwick's, but that at least was an inspirational moment, and we all grieve his loss and pray for his family.
Yeah, Adrienne, I think you're correct. I mean, he lived a purposeful life. I mean, he was very intentional, as he shared during his commencement speech at Howard, of him being intentional about what roles he took. I think, his diagnosis probably, absolutely led him to the body of work that he knew that he possibly could be living on, limited and borrowed time. And he literally he created a lifetime's worth of body in that very short time, and will forever have changed a generation of, frankly, young Black boys and girls who are, Marvel, like fans of the superheroes. But frankly, it transcended just Black boys and Black girls. And frankly, my brothers who were in their late 50s, who were comic book folk, to see it come to life in that way. There was he talked about during the junkets, during the press tour that they did for Black Panther, he talked about the two cancer patients that didn't make it and how he broke down. It all now comes to full circle of why he was doing that work, but it also shows you how you can live in Hollywood, in a creative world, and actually still create he created a protective hedge around him, and actually had people that allowed that hedge for him to be able to live his life privately and publicly at the same time. And I think that is a testament of how many of us ought to be living. And it really did hit me like he was my little brother. And I posted on my social feed that, like, we all thought this year needed to be burned down, but it was like, burn it down.
Yeah, it's this 2020 has been so heavy for so many of us, especially Black folks. We've taken a licking this year, and really just wanted to just go away, just stop. 2020, stop. I remember when 2016, we thought that was bad.
I remember when we thought the midterm elections in 2010 was the end of the world. And I will also share that seeing the clips of the little boys with their action figures, the Avengers action figures, having the funeral of Black Panther, I think has also allowed them to be able to process the deepness and the sadness of this moment. Like it's like the first little boy that the parents posted, I cried because they had the Hulk, all of them were around, and then Black Panther was on the ground in the middle.
Yeah. No, it was definitely, I thought about the kids. I mean, Black Pack paid for kids in communities where we had been mobilizing folks to go see the movie. And the first thing that I thought about was those kids, actually, when I heard the news and how they would process this moment, and just hoping that they can take inspiration from him and not feel overwhelmed and so sad about his passing, but that they take inspiration both from Chadwick and from the character that was so important for them.
Well, we know for that Wakanda will live forever, and Chadwick will live forever in our hearts. And he's created a depth of work. Thank you for joining Sunday Brunch with Higher Heights, hosted by the SIP. Your SIP hosts are Adrienne Shropshire from Black Pack, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project National Office, Fatima Goss-Graves, lost in Zoom world, from the National Women's Center, and Tracy Sturtevant from the League. We look forward to you joining us on Wednesday for our Power Hour lunch. And once again, you can meet us on Sundays at 2:00 Eastern and Wednesdays 2:00 Eastern. And have a safe and blessed and peaceful Sunday. Thank you for joining us.
Peace.